Well, welcome back to Mortgage People. This week, we are going to be talking about fixed rates and where they're headed, where it's happening with variable rates, as well as some recent, maybe shocking changes when it comes to CRA revenues, when it comes to short-term rentals. I'm Sean Humphries, joined as always by my co-host, Vaughan Zawadzki, and this is Mortgage People.
Look at those headshots, those young men on those headshots. What's happened?
I'm trying to age in reverse now. I'm trying to go backwards.
Yeah,
kind of a Benjamin Button situation.
Been a rough 20 years, although it's only been 2 years, since the interest rates have played such a big part on our market, specifically here in Toronto.
I thought you were going to say that interest rates have played such a big part in our aging process over the last years.
That's what I meant. If I wasn't fully clear about that, I mean, I feel like I've aged 20 years in the last 2, but hopefully it'll
they're
reverse.
Going down now.
Yeah, it's so maybe youth, hopefully.
Yes, at least slowing down the aging process.
I would like that.
Yeah, I saw an article that said a former TD economist said that he expects that fixed rates may have bottomed out. And I think that might come as a bit of surprise for a lot of people who are following along and hearing that the Bank of Canada is going to be lowering interest rates. They could come down another 1%. But why would fixed rates have bottomed out?
Yeah, I mean,
think that's shocking.
It's terrifying. It's shocking and terrifying because people are really, really waiting, and probably 60% of consumers out there prefer a fixed rate. Like variable rate always feels risky to a certain percent of the population, even though we may think about it differently based on mortgage penalties. But everybody's expecting the fixed rate to come down along with the BOC policy rates, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, like if you think about a fixed rate, it's more of a projection on where the variable rates will go or what the long-term implications are. So, yes, they're lower. The fixed rates are already roughly 1% lower than where the variable rates are. And so if the variable rates are only expected to drop another 1%, it's not that we have another 1% worth of fixed rates to go, because that would imply 2% lower on the variable rates, which even you are not predicting another 2% on the maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you are predicting that, but I think that's what people are thinking, is that it will keep going down, and that's not the case.
Yeah. So we're at, I think another 2% is in the forecast. I imagine that it bottoms out at 2% Bank of Canada rate, and the economists were like they were moving towards that too, and now they seem to be like hesitant to move lower than like the 2.75, because a lot of the predictions were 3.25, right, and they started moving it down, and you saw some like 2.5 out there projections, and I thought, whoa, look how correct I am. It's all landsliding down to 2%. And now there seems to be hesitancy, and I don't know if that's due to the U.S. election results.
Sure is, yeah.
Certainly looking at fixed rates, and we've talked about this before about our fixed rates being tied to the U.S. bond yield. Mm-hmm. And so I pulled up a chart this morning, and it looks like last time that there was a Republican presidency, the bond yields were up. Previous to that, like the 8 years of Barack Obama in the office, they were as low as they've ever been. And then when Biden, the last 3 years, they've been as low as they've been. And now that it seemed like, about a year ago, Republicans had basically announced that they're going to win the next election, and they did in a landslide, those bond yields started to creep up. So if we have another 4 years of high bond yields, that U.S. bond yields, that means high fixed rates for Canadians.
For sure. Yeah. And, part of the part of it is that, hey, we're going to have a higher inflation than what we were expecting. the next Republican government has talked about cutting immigration, kicking out parts of the illegal immigrants in the country, which is a large portion of people. Nobody knows exactly how many, but they make up a significant portion of the cheap labor force,
For
which
sure.
will push the cost of labor up. And then if they're bringing a lot of things into the US, a lot of manufacturing, those things will make our goods cost more money as well. In Canada here, if they're not trading with us nicely like they have for decades, then that's going to push our exports down. That's going to make things a lot harder for Canadians. Canadians will have less money to spend. Things will just feel more expensive.
I mean, a lower GDP will push the Bank of Canada to reduce that overnight rate. So our variable rate may very well drop a full percentage point below fixed rates based on those economics.
Yeah. Well, what do you think? Like, so I know you were on the record as 2%, kind of the revised number now that like all the economists are projecting is maybe not the market, sorry, is predicting 2.75 would be the bottom. Now, I don't think you're wrong, and I don't think the economists are wrong. I just don't think anybody has any real clue of what's going to happen in January when Trump takes power.
It's really hard to look ahead, or even I think it's really difficult to look even in the moment at making a projection on what's going on. So my projection was always based on historical and not really as hyper focused on what's going on in the moment. And I think that's because if you are hyper focused on the moment, you may have to take pauses and then you sprint and then you take another pause and you take a step back. If you look at it historically, our overnight rate has been very low for a very long time based on the overall strength of the economy. Overall, you zoom out what's going on. Our labor force is not growing. In fact, we need tons of immigration to grow our labor force. And now we have to slow down on that because we don't have enough housing. So it points to an overall weaker market for me, a weaker GDP, a weaker economy, which leads us to lower interest rates. So without hyper focusing on the actual inputs that are going in from a day-to-day perspective and back out of it and look at the historical, I think we wind up at 2%. We could be lower than 2% as well.
Yeah. It just seems like we're grinding the gears to get there, right? Like we need more immigration because our labor force, we don't have enough people to serve coffee. Oh, let's bring people in, and we ratchet that up fast. And like, oh, we've got too many people now because we don't have enough housing. Let's bring it back down. And we're just like
a lot of pulling levers,
up and down, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know we were going to talk about that.
And grind to, hurry up and wait.
Yeah. So it feels like, I guess with a major event like COVID that caused so much disruption, and then trying not to completely tank the economy, we really ratcheted up a couple of things, including immigration. And now we're coming back down because housing's not keeping up. Our healthcare is not keeping up. Our social services, there's not enough places for people to do anything. Our roads are full. If anybody's tried to drive to Toronto is an hour away from Toronto if you're driving from one end to the other. It's ridiculous.
That's a fact.
So, and it's just hard I think it's a hard thing to manage. And I'm not apologizing for the Liberal government because I think they were asleep at the wheel at times. And maybe there's just not an ability to make quick changes like that. I don't think I think all governments would have made the same choice to bring more people in when we needed them at the beginning of the kind of in the middle of the pandemic there. Need more people. We got to get people in. The economy is cooking. Let's keep that going. We don't want to regress because of COVID. But I think we kept it on too long. Like we kept rates low for too long. And those are the Bank of Canada, and that's the Liberal government that we had in two different decision-making processes. And
sure,
maybe
the Bank of Canada is
influence
not beholden to the Liberal government, right?
Yeah,
they're independent. And in fact, I was because you had mentioned the deputy governor of the Bank of Canada, Carolyn Rogers. So I watched November 6th. She addressed sort of the mortgage situation in Canada and gave a little bit of history about why we have certain policies and the three-legged stool. We've got consumers who need mortgages, people that we work with. We've got lenders that we also work with, and then investors. And our policy has been shaped around making sure that those three legs of that chair have been very strong, so that we can't make policy that specifically benefits borrowers because it might upset lenders and investors, which makes the mortgage market unstable. So she sort of warned. She said, we have a housing crisis issue. We have a shortage in housing, and the only way out of our inaffordability, the only way to make it more affordable, rather, is to build more housing, which we've been saying. Real estate, moguls have been saying we have a supply issue, and that government tinkering with mortgage policy can really upset the balance of that three-legged stool. So I thought it was a great article. You can Google it. Her name is Carolyn Rogers, the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada. I thought it was very informative, very intelligent, and worthwhile just sharing a little bit about because we're talking about government policy, and should the government be stepping in as much as they are?
So I agree with you. I don't, you have to have a balanced approach. And I think this is maybe this is a feature and not a bug. The Canadian government operates separately from what the Bank of Canada does. And they obviously don't consult with each other on what they're going to do.
It seems like they do not.
It seems pretty fair to assume that. Yeah.
They're aware.
Like they're not coming. The government's not coming to the Bank of Canada and saying, like, here's the rules that we're thinking of changing. How does that affect your policy rate? I think that's going to be controversial to some people who believe that the whole thing is in cahoots. But for what Carolyn Rogers is saying, and what the governors said, is that, they've constantly said, like, hey, don't mess with this. Don't try to set inflation. We're doing that. And what do you think?
Well, because
or am I reading too much into it? They are in.
Well, first of all,
they're in it together.
Canada is not up for re-election in the coming year.
Right.
And we've talked about that on this show as well. It's like, is some of this policy to make headlines for support for your party? And it may be, it may not be. It doesn't matter, but it does affect people's perceptions, and it does potentially affect the market. She was talking about the 30-year amortization on some of these expensive mortgages and what that can do to people's financial leverage, and being over leveraged, and then the risk that can have on investors and lenders. And then it's backed by government insurance company, and she was sort of warning same sort of thing about like the 2008 housing crisis, saying like, we don't get over leveraged like this. Don't give out money too free. Let's respect the foundation of the mortgage industry and not focus too heavily just on one component of it.
Right. Yeah, and I think since then, like when I got my first mortgage in 2007, I did it with like 5% down, 40-year amortization. I was a first-time home buyer. Interest rate was like 5.15% or something like that. And that's how I could afford the house that I bought. And I bought it on a single income. I bought a 70 detached property. Like, that's not available anymore for people in my situation, in a similar financial situation that I was in at that time. So they've completely tightened up the market. And now it's only now recently that they've loosened it back off to, so it's not like we're going back to 40-year amortizations and 0% down, which was available at one point.
Yeah.
Right
before 2008.
Yeah, 2008 it was available. So we're not going back to that situation, but the government of Canada can still tighten the rules if they feel like it's not working. And I think there will be a referendum on that when the new Conservative government gets elected later this year. And I think that, to me, is not that I'm agreeing or pushing it. I think that's a foregone conclusion.
Right.
Based on, did you see the betting? There's betting
It's
odds.
crazy. You can bet on anything.
Yeah. So it's like 3% odds that, maybe I'm wrong, but it was like less than 10% odds that
Microscopic. Yeah.
Trudeau was going to be the next prime minister. And it was like 90% Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah, I don't think the NDP's got a ton of support right now. They've had a little bit of scandal within their own party, and maybe some weak decision making by their leadership as well.
Yeah.
You will see what's in store. Certainly, I don't know about axing the carbon tax and what that actually puts back into Canadians' pockets, but there's been a lot of government spending that could tighten up a little bit or focused on better areas. I think it got pretty wide, the government spending, and let's focus on fundamentals of healthcare and education, I think, but that's just me.
Well, and housing, right? Like you've kind of come around. I don't know if you've said this on the podcast, but you've come around a little bit to some government funded housing to help with that kind of lower level. Am I putting words in your mouth a little bit?
No. And this. I've only come around to this lately. That I think that we need government built affordable housing. Rental units. Like, I guess it's a lot to unpack when you say affordable housing. What are we talking about? Are we talking about affordable homes for single families to purchase? And I think we have to look way further down the opportunity ladder and say if we're going to maintain any kind of labor force at all, we need some kind of affordability. And I'm a firm believer that if you sort of have two options, and you can only really kind of choose one. You could maybe have a little bit of both, but you either have to have massive wage increase on the lower entry level labor jobs, or you have to have affordable housing. And wage increases are inflationary, so I don't see that as being a long-term solution. But affordable housing, maybe not, because certainly in the 40s and 50s and 60s, there was a lot of government building for lower income families, and that seemed to have dried up. And maybe they thought, hey, we only have to do this for a decade and it'll fix the problem for forever. And maybe they were just wrong about that, and they have to get shovels into the ground now. But I strongly believe that they do. I don't know if that's in the Conservative government's mandate or not, but I think that they should take a good hard look at it, because we need a robust labor force, and we're going to lose it if people can't afford to live.
It doesn't seem like it's in their playbook, historically anyway. I think that they've probably, I don't know, I haven't heard that mentioned, but I agree with you. I think that the more affordable housing that we have for our lower income earners, the less pressure that puts on rental properties. Also, it makes owning a rental property less attractive as well. So part of it is like loosening up some again. Loosening up some of this existing supply that is maybe dedicated to investors, single family properties. How can we kind of fill in some of that bottom, and then get some of these properties that are not purpose built for rental back into the market, and then that frees up some home ownership opportunities, and then ideally lowers the bar for families to get into the market. And I don't think that's a lower price. I think it's just like it just doesn't appreciate quite as quickly. Incomes eventually catch up, and then we've got more housing available.
You have to have this conversation and say, like, what government is going to go out there to the market and say, hey, we're going to make your house worth less, vote for me.
Right.
And I've heard that argument before, and to that I roar with laughter, because we have such a shortage that it would take 20 years to get caught up, to where we need to be. People's are not going to lose value in their properties, because we have turned our properties into our nest eggs. It wasn't always necessarily like that. You would have your house, which wouldn't be particularly expensive, and it wouldn't really appreciate much over your 40 years of ownership. But you would have separate investments, right? And so due to circumstances, and a part of that is supply, we've turned our properties into our nest egg. Nobody wants to lose that. And I don't think anybody's going to be at risk, no matter what the government tries to do to build housing, which we desperately need.
But we've all done so well with housing. Like anybody that bought more than 10 years ago is done just fine. Even if properties haven't appreciated that fast over the last couple of years, we're in a great spot. You know, if you bought 20 years ago, you bought 30 years ago, and you consider your house your nest egg, you've by far blown away your expectations on what kind of equity you would get from the property. If you think back to where you were and where you are going forward, you're still in a great spot, even if it stays flat or goes down.
For sure you are. Yeah, absolutely. And if you've paid off that property, let's say that you're moving into your retirement years, you're going to be able to, if you don't have a mortgage payment to make, now you can invest that money into other investments. So things are going to be fine in that regard. We don't need to worry about too many houses being built. But we definitely, and I don't look at it as so much as charity, as so much as an overall economic view of, what is the impact if we lose our labor force? To me, that's terrifying. And not just pouring coffee, but, vegetables needing to be picked at harvest season, and all kinds of agricultural stuff.
Those are non-residents that do those jobs too, right? That's
the only way around it. Yeah.
But there's a lot of manufacturing jobs or that are done by new Canadians as they're getting into the
temporary foreign workers, meaning we bring people in that we can pay less, right? So because people can't afford, let's say on a minimum wage, can't afford to live in this country, that's the challenge.
I've got a harebrained idea on that. I think I'm going to save for another time. But that's a whole other going way out. I'll bring it up another time.
All right, let's
full tinfoil hat conspiracy theories, and I'll save those for my own personal.
That'll be my favorite.
Yeah. So maybe we'll talk about it in the after show. So the CRA, I don't know if you saw this, but the CRA.
Hold on. Before you get into the headlines, check
play
this
it.
How about that?
Love it. These fancy graphics. I think we need somebody to say headlines,
right there.
Right.
Just we'll take that clip and then we'll add it.
Let's do it. We'll add it in. We'll record something. So I don't know if you saw it, but there was something in the news recently that the CRA is now charging HST on the sale of a short-term rental property, and even going as far as looking up Airbnb listings and keeping track of who's had their property listed. And now that becomes a commercial property. It is a business. It's not a residential property. It's not meant for housing. So is the CRA right on this? Are they right to charge people HST on their short-term rental?
I don't think that the policy is really a problem. I think the fact that the case law had basically been completed prior to any major announcement, that's a bit of a problem. I mean, I think you could say hey, as of 2026, we're going to do this, but it's already happened.
Right.
It didn't.
They're going back. They're going backwards.
It didn't really make headlines at all. It was just sort of quiet, and I don't think that there's a big problem with that format. I think that the Airbnb, VRBO platforms have been somewhat problematic. We've had crime involved with it in Toronto. We've had, the big buildings like the City Place buildings. So there's a lot of those short-term rentals there where there are problems with crime, and then problems with getting your client a mortgage in that building because so much of it is short-term rental. So it's a good way to clean up that problem a little bit. Maybe it's an all right way to add more housing, because what percentage of properties are we talking about here?
Right.
That are short-term rentals, but it was brand new. People saw an opportunity to make some money. They did. Good for them. CRA should have given them some warning. That's all I'll say.
Well, they're going to make some profit on the sale of their property. I mean, if they've owned the property for 10 years, as we said before, the property's appreciated. They're going to make money on that. And I assume that the government is charging them based on the sale of the property. Is it the sale price and their HST, and then you got to pay the government their share of that?
Well, then there's the new capital gains tax on top of that. So it's
Right.
We don't want to really detract people from making investments in this country,
But that seems like what we're trying to do, though. I think we're trying to do that.
Looks terrible from that perspective, and when we see our prime minister saying, "Oh, we're gonna charge these people a little bit more. We're just these people that took advantage of our systems." I'm like, nobody took advantage of systems. People saw an opportunity to make some money out in the open. Nothing dirty going on there. So
yeah, but they essentially opened a business, right? They've got a business and they're renting out their property. If this was a bed and breakfast, that's a business, right? It's not Airbnb, short-term rentals. That's a business. You've bought a business property, not intended for people to live in. This is for people outside of our population to come in and live. It takes away from the hotel industry. It's not like we've got a shortage on hotel rooms right now, but it does take supply out of the market.
Sure.
I think we need to make it less attractive. That particular investment should be less attractive than owning it as a long-term rental and putting rental supply in.
Now, we're only really having this conversation because we have a housing crisis here. We have a shortage in supply, right? And but it is relevant. And sure, go ahead. I say, like, give people some warning. We didn't particularly foresee this housing crisis. Our 20-year outlook. 20 years ago, we weren't talking about this. 10 years ago, not really talking about this. So, like, now that we're here, we opened up the podcast by talking about all these levers that the government is pulling, and they're pulling some more. But this one, like, it makes sense, especially since I don't know how the income on a short-term rental is reported. Is it like if you're like a server at a restaurant and you're making tips, you kind of decide what you're going to claim to the government because it's a cash business, right?
Well, I think you would have, I don't know, because I don't have a short-term rental, but I think like you would count that as business income. And based on the amount that people aren't paying you in cash, they're paying you through Airbnb. You would get an invoice, you would get a statement, I'm assuming, at the end of the year stating this is the revenue that you got for your unit, and then you would use that to file your taxes.
And so if that's the case, maybe we have some research to do for a future podcast here about how that works in terms of your tax. But if you're paying tax on the income from it, then should you be paying tax on the asset?
You would pay tax as a business. So if you owned a convenience store and you own the store, you'd be paying tax based on the goods that you sell minus the cost of those goods. So your expenses might be your mortgage payment for an Airbnb. And then if you were to sell your building, those are two different things, right? You ran your business in the building, then selling the building, you're going to pay tax on that. I think it's, then you would in a perfect. Go ahead.
You need zoning, right? Like if you own a convenience store, that's going to be zoned as commercial, whereas these units would still be zoned as residential. So it's a little bit of a double dip, I think, from the government there. If you're going to pay tax on the income that was generated from it, now, I think that there's a caveat about like the window of how long the property was used for short-term rentals versus another use, whether that's long-term rental or your own living in there. So what we're seeing is people that had it listed as a short-term rental are now looking for long-term tenants to put in there for a couple of years so they can escape the tax implication on the sale.
Well, it helps our immediate housing crisis, right? So
potentially, like the vacant housing tax, we could get into that one as well. Like there just aren't many vacant properties, so the idea that a vacant property tax can clean up our housing or generate enough revenue to help out with housing, I don't think so.
I don't think that's necessary. I think it's to make. I think these changes are to make short-term housing less attractive. The Airbnb, Verbo. And there's a survey done. I know you put this in there, but I'm going to mention it. Is that Canadians blame short-term rentals for a housing affordability crisis?
Right. And it's like,
so it's
is that
popular.
realistic? Yeah. And we should mention that it was the Hotel Association of Canada who funded this study.
Is that true?
That's from the article that I read.
That's awesome.
It was pretty clear that it was funded by the opposition.
You can find 100 people that would agree with that point, right?
You can find a lot, especially when you're, when we're in this situation of such, low inventory. You can point the finger anywhere, but I think it's wrong to do it, but you could, and people will agree with you.
Yeah, that's funny. That's good. Well, it was done by Nanos Research and commissioned by Hotel Association of Canada. That's awesome.
They're forthright about it. When you read it, you can think about, and it makes sense.
Yeah. This wasn't done by like the Homeowners Association of Canada or like Potential Home Buyers Association of Canada. This is somebody that's directly affected by.
Yeah, we'll see what like
Airbnb.
the taxi cab companies of Ontario, what kind of research they commission about. We think Ubers are smelly. It's going to be 92% of Canadians agree.
Yeah, that's good. Nice. We had one other thing. So just for fun, did you want to mention?
Oh yeah, on the tailwinds of the recent U.S. election. There was a 52% spike in U.S. residents viewing Canadian real estate listings after Trump elected. So, I mean, that's hilarious for a lot of reasons. And I think personally the funniest anecdote that I could come up with is that it will increase our immigration from the U.S. by like less than 1%. Our properties are like double or triple the value of theirs, and our taxes like quadruple. Like if they come here, they're poor, right? If we're gonna get tax them at 56% income, and housing prices are, they think a $300,000 home. Well, up here it's worth 1.2 million. So the math isn't going to work. Americans, we'd love to have you. If you don't like the results of your election, you're still welcome here, but good luck.
I think it's going to be former Canadians or expatriate Canadians that are in the U.S. that may consider moving back, well off, maybe permanent residents in the U.S. that are Canadian. I think those are the people that would have an easier time moving back, because starting over into the immigration system is a long route to moving to Canada, especially if you've got your whole life in the US. I think it's great to think that all these, Americans are going to move to Canada, but the barriers are huge.
Yeah. But it's pretty funny, and a little anti Donald Trump sentiment there from the US. They did it back in 2016 as well. We're moving to Canada. Look, we'd love to have you, but come build some houses, please.
Well, until next time, let's put a pin in that, and next week let's chat about a little bit more about the stress test, and
yes, let's get to that.
I'll see you next week, Vaughan. Thanks a lot.
And a slice.